Unfortunately, it's clear that this council does not listen, so instead I'm going to take my time to say what MAGA has stood for these past 3 weeks. MAGA stands for trying to erase trans people from existence. MAGA stands for resegregation and racism. MAGA stands for censorship and book bans. MAGA stands for firing air traffic controllers while planes are crashing. MAGA stands for firing the people overseeing our nuclear arsenal. MAGA stands for firing military veterans and those serving them at the VA, including canceling research on veteran suicide. MAGA stands for cutting funds to education, including for disabled children. MAGA is profoundly corrupt, unmistakably anti-democracy, and most importantly, MAGA is explicitly a Nazi movement. You may have replaced a swastika with a red hat, but that is what it is. I will now engage in the time-honored American tradition of peaceful civil disobedience.
Get the heck, get out.
And that, my friends, is how you make a statement. That was Chris Kluwe speaking at a city council meeting at Huntington Beach. And if you looked familiar, well, it's because he was the punter for the Vikings. Now, what he did there was so incredibly bold and brave to me, because putting his body on the line, getting arrested to get a message out to the American people that he believes is important, that right there is commendable. That is how you resist fascism. And he's right. For all intents and purposes, MAGA is a modern-day Nazi movement. And more people are finally starting to wake up to that reality, including people in power like J.B. Pritzker. He's the governor of Illinois, and he had a similar warning for anyone who's still choosing to bury their heads in the sand at this point.
What comes next? After we've discriminated against, deported, or disparaged all the immigrants and the gay and lesbian and transgender people, the developmentally disabled, the women, and the minorities, once we've ostracized our neighbors and betrayed our friends, after that, when the problems we started with are still there staring us in the face, what comes next? All the atrocities of human history lurk in the answer to that question. And if we don't want to repeat history, then for God's sake, in this moment, we better be strong enough to learn from it. If you think I'm overreacting and sounding the alarm too soon, consider this. It took the Nazis 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours, and 40 minutes to dismantle a constitutional republic. And all I'm saying is that when the 5-alarm fire starts to burn, every good person better be ready to man a post with a bucket of water if you want to stop it from raging out of control.
That was great. And I'm glad that politicians are finally speaking to the urgency of this moment, because it doesn't take fascists very long to dismantle democratic institutions, as he explained. I mean, Hitler did it in 2 months. And when it comes to Project 2025, it's meant to be implemented really quickly. In fact, within the first 180 days of Trump's administration. But at this rate, it's actually being implemented faster. Twice as fast, to be specific, which means that it is on track to be fully implemented by the end of April if this pace continues. And I say that because if you look at this Project 2025 progress tracker, you can see that after just 1 month in office, 34% of Project 2025 has already been put into place. It's more than a third of the way to full completion, and specific objectives are moving along faster than other ones. As you can see, the destruction of USAID is already fully complete, but you can also sort by agency and subject to see where else they're making progress. Just to give you some examples, so when you look at LGBTQ plus objectives in Project 2025, those are already at 67% completion. Civil rights in general is at 50% already, with rollbacks at the Department of Education progressing faster than rollbacks at the Department of Labor, where they're trying to undo civil rights era protections. Looking at the environment, it's at 42% complete. DEIA is at 100% complete. And the A stands for accessibility, for those who don't know. So they're targeting disabled people too. A couple more here. Medicare is at 0% thus far, thankfully. I'm assuming that's going to change soon. Labor is at 25%, with most of the violations coming from the federal government itself. So I'll link to that down below. If you want to see it for yourself, I would encourage you to bookmark it so you can keep track of what's happening. But just think about this. 34% of Project 2025 has been implemented. We're a third of the way there, and already it feels like an entirely new government. So what is it going to look like when they hit 50%, 60%, 80%? What if they actually go all the way and cross the finish line, get 100%? I don't know if they're going to go that far, admittedly, but the fact that they've already implemented a third of Project 2025 is genuinely alarming. I mean, it's transformational, to put it mildly. It actually feels like we're undergoing a revolution already within the first 30 days of Trump's administration. And the reason why it feels like that, the reason why we all feel like we're losing our minds because of this, is because that's the point. In fact, before the election, the president of the Heritage Foundation, which is the organization that created Project 2025, explicitly described Project 2025 as the Second American Revolution.
We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Make no mistake about it, that was a threat. He's saying that if you don't obey and you don't let them transform your government, you can expect violence. Now, to be honest, I don't think that they want it to come to that, because that's going to make it more difficult for them to do what they want to do. But until it gets to that point, they're going to do their best to try to crush opponents the old-fashioned way, through censorship and legal intimidation. But if they need to, he's telling you right there, they're willing to kill people to solidify the creation of a new Christian nationalist America. So we're in a battle for the soul of this country. And I hate saying that because it sounds almost like a Democratic Party talking point. Like when Joe Biden launched his first presidential campaign in 2020, that's what he said. Oh, this is a campaign to restore the soul of the nation. But without hyperbole, like that's actually what this is. Going forward, we're either going to be a fascist country or we're not going to be a fascist country. We're at a turning point, which is why I think it's entirely appropriate for individuals like Chris Kluwe and J.B. Pritzker to invoke Nazis when talking about MAGA, because this is the modern day equivalent to that. And anyone who's part of it should carry that shame with them for the rest of their lives. And as bad as things feel now, it's bound to get even worse when they do implement more of Project 2025, if it actually does get 100% completed. And I say this because one goal, for example, is to erase LGBTQ plus people from society by trying to criminalize their existence in public life. And they've already tried to erase trans people from LGBTQ history by purging all references to them on federal websites, and even by removing them from the Stonewall National Monument, which to me feels like the biggest slap in the face ever. Because for those who don't know, trans women of color are the reason why modern LGBTQ plus rights are even a thing. It's the reason why the movement existed. Had it not been for the activism of trans women of color, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, queer people would not have the rights that they have today. So when we say that there is no LGB without the T, that's what we mean. And for them to try to cleanse them of our history is insulting, to put it mildly. But that's only the start, because the Department of Homeland Security just scrapped a rule prohibiting surveillance on someone solely on the basis of sexual orientation, which makes you wonder, why exactly would DHS want to collect intelligence on people specifically because of their sexual orientation? What threat do we pose? It's a pretty ominous sign, right? But we're not even scratching the surface, because another goal of Project 2025, putting aside LGBTQ rights specifically, is to roll back voting rights. Now, Trump is doing what he can through executive orders, but Congress is also doing their part. Republican Chip Roy reintroduced the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, aka the SAVE Act, and this legislation could literally strip voting rights away from nearly 70 million married American women, because it would base eligibility to vote on your birth certificate. But if you got married and you changed your name, guess what? The name on your driver's license no longer matches the name that's on your birth certificate. That's kind of a problem, isn't it? This would also affect some married queer people, as well as trans people as well, who have a different name than the one on their birth certificate, unless they can get it changed. But they're putting up this obstacle that will disenfranchise millions of women specifically because they don't want women to vote. So we are rolling back the clock at record speed, as intended by Project 2025, but I've only given you two examples from a Christian nationalist fascist manifesto that's more than 900 pages. There's a lot in there. But another key component that I want to talk about to Project 2025 is the concentration of power in the executive, because the people behind Project 2025 believe in a bogus legal philosophy called unitary executive theory. Now, in this theory, the president has power in the executive that is near absolute. And this week, Donald Trump just signed an executive order that essentially puts that legal theory into practice. Just listen to how they describe it.
This executive order would establish important oversight functions in the Office of Management and Budget and its subsidiary office, OIRA, supervising independent agencies and many of their actions, and also reestablishes the longstanding norm that only the President or the Attorney General can speak for the United States when stating an opinion as to what the law is.
Yeah, see, that's not how that's supposed to work. And to put in perspective just how big of a power grab this is, I want to read a quick excerpt from John Bergmeyer. He wrote a piece in Common Dreams, and this is the legal director at Public Knowledge, and I think that he explains it really well. Quote, in the order, the Trump administration purports to seize for itself the power Congress delegated to independent regulatory agencies, and as written declares the White House's interpretation of the law as authoritative with no mention of the courts. Of course, the president is not and never has been the final arbiter of what is lawful. Executive orders are not the law. They are statements of policy and memos from the president about how the executive branch conducts its internal affairs. By attempting to use executive orders to override actual laws, the kinds that are passed by Congress, not issued on a whim from the resolute desk, the Trump administration is effectively asserting that it stands above the law. Indeed, that it is the law. But the role of the executive branch is not to decide what the law is or to pick and choose which ones it likes, but to carry out and enforce the law as written. Donald Trump is a high-ranking government employee, not a king. If there are laws he does not like, he can work with Congress to change them. Well, I mean, that's how it's supposed to work, at least in theory, but Trump doesn't actually think that he's bound to the Constitution because he thinks he's a king. I mean, the official White House Twitter account literally tweeted out a picture of him wearing a crown, calling him a king. And before that, he tweeted, "He who saves his country does not violate any law," which is a tacit admission that he knows he's breaking a lot of laws and a declaration that he has supremacy over the laws that he's violating, which is why he's unbothered by lawsuits and court cases, because he doesn't think that he has to follow them. And he's not. And legal experts say that he's dangerously close to the red line of just openly defying judges. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that what he's doing already amounts to open defiance of federal judges, because he is ignoring them. But the reason why legal experts aren't calling it open defiance yet is because his administration is still cooking up flimsy legal justifications for their defiance. The Washington Post reports, the most dramatic example came Wednesday. Plaintiffs in a lawsuit seeking to block the Trump administration's 90-day pause on foreign aid asked a judge to hold the administration in civil contempt for violating his temporary restraining order, blocking the freeze. A day earlier, attorneys for the government said agencies could keep a hold on much of the funds despite Judge Amir Ali's order, based on statutes and regulations that exist separately from Trump's executive directive. The government said Ali's order was silent on those other powers and vowed to continue suspension of aid unless the judge clarified his ruling. Legal experts and a former federal judge said doing so despite a court order was extraordinary and troubling. David Super, a Georgetown University law professor, said the administration was one step short of outright defiance of a federal judge. Now, keep in mind that this is just one of many examples of him defying court orders. And that same professor who was quoted said that this is how the administration is responding to all legal challenges. Now, I'm no expert, but it seems like some experts are hesitant to call it outright defiance unless he just straight up says no to a judge, meaning so long as he continues to provide bogus legal justifications for his noncompliance, then it's technically not a constitutional crisis. But I mean, by that standard, I guess it's not a constitutional crisis if he chooses to run for a third term and defy the 22nd Amendment either, right? Because you can also argue there that he has constitutional authority to run for a third term based on some bullshit legal rationale. Maybe, it only bars presidents from serving more than 2 consecutive terms. It doesn't say that, but maybe you can make that argument based on some bogus legal theory. And before you accuse me of being hyperbolic, a circuit court judge is already laying the groundwork for that kind of an argument, saying that the question of him serving a third term isn't straightforward, actually. It's a pretty novel and complex constitutional question. So these are the kinds of arguments that we can expect from a corrupt administration that lies compulsively. And when you take into consideration the fact that he also ordered the Justice Department to fire all remaining Biden-era attorneys under the pretense of depoliticizing the DOJ, ironically, well, we have to stop pretending that this isn't what it looks like. The man wants to be a fucking king. And not a modern king, an old school king who's hungry for global conquest. I mean, he's trying to annex Greenland, the Panama Canal. He wants to make Canada the 51st state. He announced that he wants to take over Gaza. He's demanding that Ukraine give up 50% of their natural resources in perpetuity as a thank you for defending them against Russia. I mean, the U.S. would basically own Ukraine if they agreed to go along with this. And who knows how close we'll be to war with Iran, since Netanyahu is trying to lure Trump into attacking them. Maybe he'll choose to make them the 52nd state after Canada. I mean, it feels like anything is on the table at this point. So we need to get our heads out of the sand and recognize the seriousness of the situation that we're in. It is a constitutional crisis, and Trump very clearly wants to be a dictator, and he is a fascist. He has shown us who he is again and again. And if you still don't believe him, after he tried to overthrow the last election, after Project 2025, after Doge has violated dozens of laws, I don't know what to say. I mean, I know it's hard to accept that our country has fallen to fascism, but how many more red flags do we need to see before people wake up? And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You all get it. But a lot of other people are still in denial about what's happening. The administration themselves, like, they couldn't be any clearer if they tried. The official White House account tweeted out what they're calling an ASMR video of migrants being deported. And I don't think that Trump himself tweeted this, to be clear, but this is the kind of sick, sadistic people that we're dealing with. They are fucking monsters, and the MAGA movement is a collection of fascist Trump cultists and Christian nationalists. And Chris Kluwe was right to call MAGA a modern-day Nazi movement, because that's what the fuck it is. And we need to stop pretending like it's not. Like the Nazis, they want absolute power, and they want to terrorize anyone who doesn't align with their demented ideology. I mean, just listen to the way that this one MAGA pastor talks about opponents to Christianity.
You have to reward friends and punish enemies. It's not enough just to release the good guys. You then have to terrorize, absolutely terrorize. Your enemies should be having nightmares every night thinking about what the Christians are going to do to them. Christians should be in government, and those Christians who pursue political office and attain it by the grace of God should absolutely be a terror to anybody who is a threat to Christians here in America.
So that's the kind of people who we're dealing with. It's one person, yes, but still I think that he's indicative of the people in power currently, who are overtly cruel, explicitly fascistic, and just terrible people in general. And to be clear, anyone who doesn't live in accordance with his interpretation of the Bible is a threat to Christianity, according to him. That includes LGBTQ plus people and straight people who have sex out of wedlock and non-traditional women. Perhaps you work, perhaps you wear pants, I don't know. Anything that falls outside of their norms, that is something that he wants to ban. Now, lucky for this guy, Project 2025, an explicitly fascist Christian nationalist project, is already at 34% completion. And Trump just signed an executive order that will supposedly fight, quote, anti-Christian bias. And yes, that too is unconstitutional. It explicitly violates the First Amendment, but he clearly doesn't care, because the long-term goal in America is turn it into a Christian nationalist society where everybody complies with the whims of whatever the fascist dictator is at that time. And the ends justify the means. Now, 10 years ago, I would have said that the Constitution would have stopped this. It would have protected us from this. But now that we have a president who doesn't think that the Constitution even applies to him, it kind of feels like everything is on the table. So I commend people like Chris Kluwe and J.B. Pritzker, and basically anybody else who's using whatever platform they can get and using the appropriate and necessary language to highlight the severity of this moment. The MAGA movement is unquestionably a modern-day Nazi movement, and they pose an existential threat to every one of us. And we all need to wake up to that reality before it's too late.
Luigi, not happy.